Thank you very much. Okay, again, so good evening, maybe in Jakarta also, maybe not a good evening. And today, so I'd like to discuss about the Islamic Fintech and its impact. My name is Yasushi Suzuki from Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, Japan. So first of all, okay, let me introduce myself a bit. Actually, let's say, this is my academic background. Actually, I've got PhD economics from the University of London, and currently, so research interest includes institutional political economy of financial development and Islamic finance. And this is my working experience. I joined in namely the Long-Term Credit Bank of Japan, LTCB, in 1986. This bank was established as a specialized bank for mainly mediating the financial resources onto the infrastructure project in Japan. Then during my stay in LTCB, I was mainly engaged in corporate finance and structural finance and loan syndication and secondary loan trading and system development in foreign exchange and treasury. And also during my stay in LTCB, temporarily, I was seconded to that joint venture in Jakarta because that LTCB had a joint venture agreement with that BCA Indonesia. So I was seconded to that such a joint venture bank in Jakarta. And also, I experienced working in Singapore branch, London, and New York. And also, I have experience to working for a London-based investment bank. And since 2004, I received back. I returned back to Japan to assume a post as a professor at the Asia Pacific University currently. This is just my rough background. And today, I'd like to enjoy that discussion with you about that fintech and its expected impact. And hopefully that actually, what can I say? I've already sent that lecture note for that today's lecture. So this is that lecture note. Maybe I do hope that you've got it. And also, I hope that you've already skimmed reading on that lecture note in advance. Basically, I'm going to follow on that lecture note for explaining about that at today's lecture. Firstly, so this is part of that definition of fintech and the digital transformation, DX. Digital transformation, DX, has become the most frequently used words in this last decade. However, the term of DX has no universal definition due to its diversity. A scholar defined the digital transformation as the realignment of or new investment in advanced technology and business models to more effectively engage digital customers at every touch point in the customer's experience life cycle. And the more important issue here now Japan, that typhoon is coming, so that's why maybe that wind is quite stronger, getting stronger right now. So can you hear that such a sound of wind? No, it's okay. Financial institutions are perhaps the pioneer in embracing that ongoing DX with an aim to harness their efficiency and performance. Moreover, the adoption of technologies is considered as essential endeavor for any financial service provider to remain competitive and survive in the market under the name of fintech. Anyway, that in order to survive, the application of the fintech would be quite necessary for every almost all the financial institutions. Then, according to Forbes, digital banking amounted to 7 billion US dollar in 2019, and whereas digital insurance, InsurTech, recorded transactions amounting to 6.8 billion US dollar, and the digital payment summed up 15.1 billion at the same time. So the market of the fintech is getting larger and larger. Then maybe, so almost all that participate in today's class, so are very concerned about that Islamic fintech. Literally speaking, that Islamic fintech is that amalgamation, is a combination of the technology and Islamic finance. Then, of course, in that mode of Islamic mode of financial intermediations, actually the Islamic mode is very concerned about that Sharia compliant, and also the Islamic mode of financial intermediation is very concerned about the so-called Maqsid Sharia. It's an objective of that Sharia, actually, right? Mainly that more scholars are concerned about that social justice. Actually, that most Islamic economists and scholars are expecting that Islamic mode of finance to realize that the social justice and poverty alleviation. But one of the questions here that the fintech in conventional financial institutions may also contribute to enhancing the social justice. Actually, that but basically, that Sharia compliance, compliant issue is a very crucial issue, quite a key issue in that Islamic finance. So that's why maybe that I guess that all the participants may well about that, such as Sharia compliance, I suppose. Then later, so we can discuss more about that issue. Actually, that I'm very interested in your view on that issue, how that Islamic finance or Islamic fintech would be able to contribute to realizing that the social justice. Then maybe, so we can discuss further, so later stage. Okay. But today, basically, I'd like to explain about that fintech here, a typology of business financial business models on digital transformation, DX. In the lecture note, so you can see that that study, the global COVID-19 fintech market rapid assessment study. So this study was conducted by a team coordinated by the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance. So basically, I use that working taxonomy developed by that team that brings together a coherent conceptualization of fintech activities, whilst appreciating that sector's diversity and differentiated business models. Maybe you can see that table one in that lecture note. So I just copied and paste that working so taxonomy, fintech taxonomy developed by that team here. Then they categorize that totally how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9, yes, business models. They use that term of the verticals in this taxonomy actually, that digital lending and digital capital raising and digital banking and digital savings and digital payment and digital asset exchange and digital custody and insurance tech, and finally that wealth tech. In that category of that retail facing, this is their terminology actually, that roughly speaking, this is the B2C transaction, B2C transactions actually. Then they raised that such a 9 verticals, and also they explain about that sub verticals in each main verticals in this taxonomy. So this working taxonomy includes that 13 discrete primary fintech verticals and 103 sub-verticals. These have been further categorized into 2 overarching groups: retail facing and marketing, so market provisioning. So B2C financial transactions and B2B fintech. Then here, so in this paper, in this lecture note, so I concentrate on that retail facing, so B2C transactions, basically. And the nine primary fintech verticals, actually. I'm focusing on that 9 primary fintech verticals here. Then basically, so here, so our concern is addressed to predict how that fintech and DX in financial contracts would reshape that current mode of financial intermediation and financing contract. So what can I say? We are concerned about that future of that financial market and my financial system. Then here, so I'm so concerned about that. Who are the major stakeholders? Who has keen interest in promoting fintech business models? Then first agent is first player is a commercial banking unit, commercial banks. The second one is an investment banking unit. And the third one is other financial unit. Then, as you may know that what are the core business by each banking unit, commercial banking unit and investment banking unit. You know that commercial banking unit as being mainly engaged in deposit undertaking and dealing with payment settlement and mobilizing saving to finance bankable clients. So you know that indirect financing. Actually, that commercial banks are mainly engaged in deposit taking and payment settlement and indirect finance. In contrast, so what is the main role undertaken by the investment bank? Is underwriting and distributing securities. This is a direct finance, and also fund management and private banking. The nature of their business is associated with the direct finance. Then here, the other financial unit is including microfinance institutions, mobilizing that fund from donors to empowering that marginalized people, non-bank consumer finance companies, and insurance companies, and so on. Then here, of course, we are concerned how that fintech would affect that commercial banks, investment banks, and other financial institutions. But in particular, so we are concerned that commercial banking unit still play that significant role under the current mode of financial intermediation and services. Commercial banks are more or less protected under the banking regulation for the regulatory objective of maintaining financial stability while promoting sound financial intermediation. Actually, that without such a commercial banking, particularly the payment settlement and deposit taking, maybe our macroeconomic would be quite suffer. Actually, that you know that the bankruptcy of just only one bank may trigger that so-called bank runs. It's a chain bankruptcy of the banks. If so, our economy or macroeconomic would suffer a lot from such a potential bank runs. So that's why usually in most countries, the regulator is expected to monitor always to and control that activity of the commercial banks in order to avoid that potential bank runs and the chain reaction and the chain bankruptcy of the banks. And here in this paper, while we identify who has key interest in promoting each fintech business model, we argue how each fintech business models would cast threat, opportunity, or neutral to the commercial banking unit simultaneously. We argue what kind of incentives are held by the stakeholders for promoting each fintech business model. This is the rough objective of that such a paper, so that lecture note actually. So we follow that working taxonomy by the Cambridge research team, and we follow that such a categorization. Actually, that we are going to focus on that 9 main fintech verticals, including that digital lending and digital banking. Then we are concerned about that how that fintech business would affect that the commercial banks and investment banks and other financial unit. In particular, so we are very concerned about that how that fintech would affect that the commercial banking unit. Isn't it a threat or opportunity or neutral? This is main, I say, method or objective of that this paper. So this lecture note here. Then basically, so I do hope that you've already skimmed the reading on that lecture note in advance. That's why. So I just look at the first one only. Then digital lending. Then in that taxonomy, actually, that you can see that these sub-verticals, actually, peer-to-peer or marketplace lending, and basically a peer-to-peer is one of the characteristic financial forms in digital lending here, P2P, peer-to-peer lending. The online platform enables individuals and companies to lend and borrow money by connecting lenders with borrowers directly through an online peer-to-peer lending platform. Maybe you know that. Then, so far as peer-to-peer lending provides less bankable individuals and micro and small and medium-sized enterprises with that opportunities to raise funds, it would contribute to financial inclusion. It implies that peer-to-peer lending would not necessarily cast a threat to conventional commercial banks because those less bankable and marginalized individuals and small and micro enterprises are not their main client. So that's why, from such a perspective of the social justice or financial inclusion or poverty alleviation, maybe that peer-to-peer lending style might be quite contributing. However, at this moment, if existing Islamic banks or conventional commercial banks are not willing to provide that such any fund to that such a less bankable or marginalized client, maybe that peer-to-peer lending platform would be neutral to the conventional banking. On the other hand, it implies that if the expansion of the peer-to-peer lending includes that bankable client, individual and firms, in particular, the secured loan backed by residential or commercial property as collateral would cast a threat to conventional commercial banks. Or we may say that we would give an opportunity for them to diversify the associated risk and uncertainty, as well as to create a new agency arrangement fee business by fund arrangement upon online and mobile banking platform. No, of course. Then maybe not so easy for you to see that slide, right? Maybe that table is available in that lecture note in your hand. The working taxonomy refers to consumer purchasing financing, customer cash advance. The sub-articles also apply that principle to the peer-to-peer lending to the traditional financing to consumers such as auto loans and car financing, payday loans, which charge a high rate of interest. The sub-vertical of digital merchant cash advance solutions also apply the principle of a peer-to-peer lending to the quick but very high interest rate, close to usury. Loans promissory note discounting to small business unit in financial trouble. Maybe, so the above mentioned factoring and consumer purchasing financing are dealt with by non-bank financial companies under the current mode of financial intermediation and services. So the fintech platform would change the nature of risk absorption from indirect finance to direct finance to diversify the associated risk and uncertainty, possibly giving an opportunity to the commercial banking unit for the new frontier of its business, including Islamic financial institutions, in my view. This is an example of that how I could see that how that each verticals, each fintech vertical would affect that commercial banking, actually. Then, as for the other Maybe so. Please so read that lecture note actually, right? Maybe the time is quite limited, so that's why basically I wish to summarize. So my argument here. Okay, then let's see that chat box during background. Basically, okay. Basically, no specific questions so far. Okay, don't mind. So in the lecture notes, so I summarize so how each fintech business would affect the commercial banking unit. So is the trend of DX on digital transformation a threat or opportunity for commercial banks, including Islamic commercial banks here? Then in my analysis, actually that these sub-verticals, as for that, these sub-verticals, so would cause that threat to commercial banking unit. Mainly that a part of that digital lending and digital banking and digital savings and this, mainly that's right actually because it makes sense right actually because what I say commercial banks are mainly engaged in that deposit taking and the payment settlement and indirect finance. So that's why actually that new platformers are using that such an online or fintech would so cause such a threat to that commercial banking, particularly in that field or sub-verticals of the digital lending and digital banking and digital savings. Then in contrast, on these sub-verticals, maybe that this sub-vertical would cause that neutral to commercial banking unit. Not so significant threat, not so significant opportunity to that commercial banking unit, in our view, in my view. And these are as for that, these sub-verticals, these sub-verticals would bring that opportunity to that commercial banking unit for diversifying that the risk and uncertainty onto the final investors. In conclusion, actually that the fintech and digitalization would give other financial services a chance to penetrate into the traditional financial products and services monopolized by the commercial banking unit in the past, in particular, deposit taking, payment settlement, and mediating financial resources from depositors to corporations. In particular, that field or sub-verticals of the digital savings, digital payments, and digital lending. Actually, that I suppose that conventional and Islamic commercial banks would lose that business opportunity. I mean that these fintech technology, fintech would cause the threat to the conventional and Islamic commercial banks. Also, the services related to money dealing would be penetrating by newcomers in digital banking, digital asset exchange, and digital custody. The peer-to-peer financial services would erode that monopolistic and oligopolistic market in lending, payments, and money dealing operated by commercial banks in the past. So roughly speaking, the peer-to-peer mode of financial intermediation and services would make traditional commercial banks extremely difficult to earn a sufficient profit to maintain their franchise value. Some innovative commercial banks may reshape their mode of business for their survival with a direction to peer-to-peer and direct finance mode of financial intermediation and services upon the technology of digitalization. However, such innovative commercial banks would not be called as commercial banks any longer. This is a quite irony, actually. In order to survive in the market, so some innovative commercial bank would transform their business style mainly from that indirect finance based to that direct finance. So at the moment, so how could we say that such a new type of that commercial banks as are commercial banks in that existing mode? So for a sufficient level of wealth and capital has been accumulated in society, and a sufficient number of investors are ready to and willing to absorb various types of credit risk and uncertainty. The peer-to-peer mode of financial intermediation and services would be feasible and perhaps desirable for ultimate investors and users of financial product and services. One of the questions here that if such a sufficient level of wealth and capital has not yet been accumulated, particularly observed in developing countries, can we simply conclude that the trend of digitalization would be desirable? So I wish to hear that your view on that question and the point later. Okay. In developing countries, we may still need that role of commercial banks as financial intermediaries by mediating idle and stagnant funds held by households to the industrial sector in a considerable large scale. In theory, so far as a sufficient level of wealth and capital has been accumulated enough to meet the financial demand in a global scale, including that in developing countries, the trend of DX would be feasible. However, there is no guarantee of always ensuring the stable and sufficient circulation of the flows of funds from an investor to a user of a fund. This is my argument here. Another question here is that the peer-to-peer mode of saving and payment would put to an end the existing centralized, monopolized mode of savings and payment, which has been highly regulated and monitored by the regulators under the current mode of supervising the banking industry for ensuring financial stability in order to avoid that potential bank run. How will the decentralized peer-to-peer mode of saving and payment affect that financial stability? This is another question. In theory, as more commercial banks are shifting their mode of business to investment banking by diversifying credit risk, the regulators would be less concerned about that accumulation of non-performing loans, which would trigger the bank run of financial product and services. However, the regulator may be more concerned about the liquidity shock in a respective level of diversified investors, which may trigger the chain reaction of the shortage of liquidity in diversified types of currency and money upon digitalization. How will the regulators respond to the diversified and peer-to-peer mode of savings and payments? The response is becoming an important challenge for the regulators to respond to the trend of fintech and digitalization of financial product and services. Okay, thank you for listening. So I wish to stop my lecture here. So I wish to discuss with you on this issue, and I'd like to. I'm so very interested in your view on that topic.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Dr. what you have delivered about Islamic fintech and its impact for society. It's very interesting, and we are very fortunate to have listened to your presentation today. Okay, now let's get into the Q&A session, Professor. We have several questions in the chat room box.
Okay, good.
Okay, so the first one is from Miss Laili Dwi Arsyanti. Okay, Professor, can you elaborate
Good.
more on integrating
Integrating
commercial
Islamic
and
commercial and the
social
social
funds
funds through fintech. Interesting questions. But how do you feel actually? Do you have any idea for that integrating the commercial and the social fund? Miss Laili Dwi Arslaniti?
Yes, yes.
I cannot hear you. Sorry about that, actually. But one of the issues that, what can I say? It's quite important to mediate that fund through the commercial banking unit.
Sorry, my connection.
Sorry, it's okay. Actually, that in order to develop that economy, financial intermediation is quite important, because what can I say? Investment should be financed by money, finance, right? Finance is quite essential for realizing that any investment. So the role of financial intermediation by banks is quite important for developing that economy. Then, in order to mediate the financial resources, actually, what can I say? Idle money or stagnant money in a society is a quite fundamental issue. No money, maybe no chance for mediating. So that's why, firstly, that wealth creation and wealth accumulation is a quite important issue. So that's why I say, of course, maybe that we can see that some difference between that commercial fund and the social fund. However, in order to develop that economy first, maybe how to mediate that commercial fund should be outweighed, much more quite important in my view. That's why after the stage, we have to consider that about the social justice, like poverty alleviation and maybe redistribution of the wealth. So social finance is quite important, is a play that quite important to contributing to the social justice and poverty alleviation. But first, so in my view, so how to mediate that commercial fund might be quite much more important, particularly for the developing countries, in my view. Maybe I'm not sure that this answer might be related to your questions. I'm not sure, but thank you very much. And the next question is, how do we manage risk in fintech? But yes, I know. Maybe I suppose that you, I understood your questions, I suppose. But what I say, technology might be, let's say, contributing to that access to that financial resources. However, more fundamental issue is that, I say, how that Islamic finance would be contributing to that such an inclusive and rich marginalized people. For example, the microfinancial institutions, microcredit and microfinancial institutions play that quite important role for alleviating that poverty. However, in reality, actually the role of Islamic microcredit is quite marginal. Actually, that market share of that microcredit, even in that Bangladesh, Actually, that the Islamic microcredit financial institutions, so market share is a less than 1%. So conventional NGO microcredit play that much more important role for alleviating the poverty in Bangladesh. I'm not sure. I wish I don't want to generalize that issue. However, much more important issue for me is that how the Islamic mode of financial intermediation would contribute to alleviating that poverty. This is my answer. Thank you. Will P2P lending practice eliminate the fractional reserve system? Sorry, I cannot understand. Sorry, I'm regular, so maybe. Okay, so P2P financing platform. Yes, quite interesting point. So Bazli Fakri. Yes, I agree that not all the P2P financial platform have a higher profit and lending rate actually, right? Yes, that's true, right? But to some extent that profit margin would be a quite important incentive for that newcomers in that such an online or peer-to-peer lending business, I suppose, right? If that profit margin is not attractive, maybe less investors would come to that market. So that's why that regulator should help or I say support such a newcomer. I'm not sure that the logic for your view actually. Maybe in my impression, that not necessary for the government to promote such a fintech business, right? Islamic fintech more vulnerable to fraud risk, cyber attack, and money laundering activities. Yes, I suppose, right? So that's why actually that I say based upon that current technology level of the blockchain, actually that it's not so easy for us to install our trust and confidence in that blockchain technologies for the payment settlement. So maybe some of you are very know about such a cryptocurrency like Bitcoins and Ethereum and Ripple, actually, right? Then, of course, that market of the cryptocurrency is now getting larger and larger. But of course, that payment system is backed by that technology, so-called blockchain technology. So that is still, so what I say, not perfect. Right, so that's why maybe in the near future, if we can, what can I say, upon that advanced level of the blockchain, if we could install more trust or confidence in that blockchain, the payment system based upon that blockchain, maybe that we could resolve also such a cyber attack or fraud risk and money laundering risk, I suppose. Or I do hope.
Okay. Next question is from Mr. Yazid. I just
How much do we need to implement fintech technology? I could not understand the point of that question. Sorry, but
Okay,
as I
maybe
mentioned, yes.
maybe Mr. Yazid, can you explain more about your question, please? Yeah, maybe operator team can help Mr. Yazid to open his mic.
Maybe in the field of that digital crowdfunding, actually that that already we know that such a system of crowdfunding. So that's why based upon that existing level of technology, maybe we could develop or enhance that such a market of that digital crowdfunding. However, as for the banking, digital banking and payment, so still, as I mentioned, that we need higher or advanced level of the blockchain technology in order for us to install more trust and confidence to that payment system. That's why I'm not sure how much, how fast that such a reliable blockchain technology would be realized. I'm not sure, but maybe a few years later, maybe I do hope that some so reliable blockchain technology will come to us, I suppose.
Okay.
So Muhammad is okay for you? Sorry.
Is it okay, Mr. Yazid? Okay, maybe we move to the next question.
The asymmetric information problem. Yes. True. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Quite interesting point, right? So that's why more scholars actually or economists are really expecting to that fintech technology would attenuate that asymmetries of information among the players, right? But when I say I would agree that fintech technology would reduce the transaction cost for processing that financial contract or services. So they can reduce the transaction cost for processing. However, in nature, the asymmetric information is quite intrinsic. It's a psychology, right? Psychological effect. So that's why even though that borrower so try to disclose that all that information through that technology, any technology, the lender side and investor side would tend to suspect or doubt that some important information is still hidden. So in that sense, that asymmetric information problem is quite intrinsic, maybe not so easy to resolve through the fintech, in my view. But as I mentioned, for facilitating the financial product and services, maybe that fintech would be able to contribute to that reducing the transaction cost, related transaction cost, I suppose, including that cost for collecting that information and checking and monitoring. Maybe that monitoring cost would be maybe that can be reduced, I suppose. Thank you.
Okay, let's get into the next question.
Okay.
From Ms.
What is the role of government promoting fintech? This is a quite so important issue, right? But still, so we have not yet reached to any consensus, right? How that government should be involved in that promotion of the fintech, I suppose, right? Because what can I say? Monetary system, and currency is basically that I say backed by that government, right? Actually, that in the past, of course, that money was issued by king. Money is a power, right? So that's why actually that financial system and monetary system is backed by that power. Cryptocurrency, for example, this is a big challenge to that such an existing regime, right? Because backed by that such a blockchain. So blockchain does not need that governmental engagement. Actually, that our community wish to control that currency. This is the beginning, what can I say? This is original incentive for creating that cryptocurrency backed by that blockchain technology. So that's why, but of course, the government wish to continuously control that money or financial system. That's why now I'm not sure. So how that government would so be involved in that such a trend of that digitalization, including the cryptocurrency. But good questions, I suppose. How do you think that competition between fintech and digitalization? Yeah, that's true, actually. But maybe I'm not sure that maybe that more non-bank would challenge to that conventional banking or using that such a DX, I suppose, in the future. I mean, I suppose that conventional bank would lose that their own business. Now that business are quite completely protected by the government. Maybe now, from now on, more non-bank would challenge that digital banking area, I suppose.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
sir, for the answers.
Yeah,
Okay,
of course, what can I
now,
say? This is just my personal view, right? That's why maybe I also interested in your view, of course, in that such a, let's say, how that fintech would reshape that existing financial market and institutions, of course. Thank you.
okay, thank you, sir. Okay, maybe we have already the person who want to ask, Mr. Eko Saputra. Would you please unmute yourself? Okay, please, operator, help Mr. Eko Saputra to open his mic.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you for the knowledge and research you share with us, Professor. Very enlightening. I saw on your Google Scholar, it turns out that a lot of your research also discusses about my country, Indonesia. One that is interesting is the one entitled of Islamic Microfinance and Poverty Alleviation Program, which you wrote with Ms. Rovida from Ibn Khaldun University, Bogor, my campus. In that paper, you mentioned the importance of Islamic microfinance collaborating with mosques and Islamic charities. So my question is, if it is related to DX developments with microfinance background, which is still traditional, and what about not unbankable community people? How to solve the issues, Professor? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, quite important questions. So thank you very much. I'm also quite so interested in that why the market share of the Islamic finance, including the Islamic microfinance, Indonesia is quite low. Actually, that the market share of the Islamic banks Indonesia is around 10%. So recently, reached to that level of the 10%, but maybe 2 years back, just only that less than 5%. So Indonesia is one of the Muslim majority nations, right? However, the market share of the Islamic banking is quite small. And in the field of the microcredit, and market share is also quite marginal at this moment. As I mentioned in the Bangladesh, actually Bangladesh is also one of the Muslim majority nations. However, the Islamic microcredit institutions share is less than 1%. So NGO and conventional microcredit, their role is quite dominant. That's why, what can I say? Still, it's quite a big puzzle. I wish to know. So I say, why that Islamic banking, Islamic microcredit, even in that Muslim majority nations, is quite limited. Of course, what can I say? Currently, actually, the conventional banks and conventional microcredit could be able to mobilize that more fund. However, basically, what I say, Islamic financial institutions are facing the difficulties for mobilizing such a fund to the alleviation of the poverty, I suppose. So I wish to know why. So I'm quite interested in that this point. Hopefully, that financial technology, fintech, would be contributing to expanding that such access for the investors to the Islamic financial institutions. I hope. However, I'm not sure. Actually, how many investors are there in Indonesia for investing in that Islamic microfinancial institutions? I'm not sure.
Okay, is that clear, Mr. Eko? Okay, thank you for your answer, sir.
No, not answer, right? But I say.
Okay, thank you for your point of view.
Yeah, but of course, you know that Maqasid al-Sharia, right? Actually, that social justice, realization of social justice is quite important on Maqasid Sharia. It's Maqsud, so Sharia banking, or yes, right, Islamic finance, I suppose. But so far, it's not so easy for mediating such a social fund through the Islamic financial institutions, Indonesia, in Bangladesh, and also in Malaysia also.
Okay, thank you, sir.
This is a quite big puzzle. And also, of course, I do hope that this is a quite big challenge for Indonesia, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I think that is all for the Q&A. Or maybe is there anyone who still want to ask, Professor?
Yes.
Okay.
Chat box? No, not chat box. It's okay.
I think there's no question.
No further.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay,
Good.
maybe we can finish it now. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you, Professor, for all of your point of view for today's lecture. It's very
Okay.
and
Good.
very insightful. And as we have a small token of our appreciation for you for your lecture today, now
No, not necessarily. Yeah. Actually, I didn't have enough time, right, for preparation. Yeah, to be honest with you, right. So that's why, actually, But I've already sent that questions for today's lecture, right? So maybe I do hope that you also enjoy that questions. And also, I do hope that I'd like to hear that your view and comment on that, particularly that last questions are in that questions.
Yes, those questions are on the website. Okay, so the participants, you .itv
Hmm.
and answer.
Oh, yeah, maybe on this one.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So how
The
do you
question is,
define fintech? And yeah, it's okay, right? Maybe that you
Mhm.
can just copy and paste work, right, from that lecture, I suppose. And yes, right, core business. Actually, the commercial banking unit and yes, right, respectively. So deposit taking and payment settlement and financial intermediation, commercial banking, and underwriting and distributing of the securities is investment banking, basically, right? And well, basically, so of course, you don't have to follow that my view. Maybe so you can explain in your view, actually, how that fintech technology in that working taxonomy mentioned in the lecture would affect the operation of commercial banking unit. And the last one is maybe it's completely free, right? Maybe I can say you can answer that question upon your view, actually. How is your view on expected impact of the digital transformation on DX on Muslim countries?
okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
No.
Now,